Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. So, you may have heard about this lawsuit between a group of American attorneys and journalists who are affiliated with Julian Assange suing the CIA and Mike Pompeo. Now, they claim that the CIA violated their constitutional rights by recording their conversations with Assange and copying their devices after visiting him in the Ecuadorian embassy. Now, last month, the CIA tried to get the case dismissed. But in a big win for the plaintiffs, a U.S. District Court judge ruled the case can proceed. So tonight we're talking to one of the plaintiffs in this case, attorney Deborah Herbeck. Deborah is an entertainment and media lawyer at the Manhattan law firm Herbeck Kunstler. She has provided legal support to WikiLeaks on media law matters since 2015 and has visited Julian Assange on numerous occasions. So we're going to dive into this recent case against the CIA, as well as the case and where Julian Assange is at with his potential extradition to the United States. So it's going to be an interesting conversation, an important conversation. The case against Julian Assange affects all journalism and the exposure of empire lies, the exposure of the military-industrial complex and of the surveillance that we have. So this is a very important topic, an important conversation. Debbie Herbeck, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kim, for having me.
So first of all, I guess I have to ask, how did you get involved with Julian Assange to begin with, to where you started visiting with him and made it to the Ecuadorian embassy and all of that? How did you get involved?
Well, I was initially brought in when a German uh, broadcast television company was seeking to interview Julian in the embassy and use some footage from that interview in a documentary that they were producing on Edward Snowden. And I was brought in really just to negotiate the terms of them being able to use the footage and, the terms of the release. So just strictly in a media entertainment law capacity.
Okay, so they just came to you and said, we have this footage and we want to use it. And then how did you then get connected with Julian from that?
It was the other way around.
Oh.
Julian had reached out to his human rights attorneys, who I knew. It was Michael Ratner at the time, who's since passed. And Michael Ratner's was a long time colleague and mentor. And he knew that I practiced in this area, and he didn't have the expertise to negotiate these kinds of releases. So he brought me in.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. So then when did you start meeting with Julian?
Oh, the first time I met with Julian was probably in late 26 to summer of 2016 or thereabouts. And then there were, it was always related to media matters, whether it's book contracts or issues with filmmakers trying to tell the story of WikiLeaks and, basically just negotiating deals with them.
So when did Julian, let me just kind of get my facts straight because I want to kind of go through the history of this, but when did he get transferred to Belmarsh? Because he was in the Ecuadorian embassy for a really long time.
Yes, he went to the Ecuadorian embassy in 2012, and he was there until April 11th, 2019. So it was about 7 years.
Wow. Yeah.
So he's been in maximum security prison in Belmarsh in London since April 2019, which is, almost 5 years.
Yeah. So he's been incarcerated since 2012. I mean, effectively. I mean, he was at the Ecuadorian embassy, so he wasn't really incarcerated at that time, but he was imprisoned in a way he couldn't go anywhere. Otherwise, they would capture him and take him away. So he's been...
Exactly. It was basically house arrest. There was a arrest warrant out for him, and so the police were basically surrounding the embassy 24/7. And had he stepped out of the embassy to try to go anywhere, they could have arrested him. The Ecuadorian government at the time was quite sympathetic to human rights issues and offered him asylum in the embassy, and that's how that came to pass. In fact, I believe it was Michael Ratner who negotiated the sanctuary for him. And that was why he was protected within the embassy grounds.
Wow.
So effectively, it's Ecuadorian territory when you're inside the embassy.
Right. Right. So that's where this case kind of gets interesting because you're inside of Ecuador, technically, and the American government is spying on you while you're talking to an Australian citizen. Is that right? That's fundamentally what happened.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So we were in a situation where what we believed we believed we were in a situation where the people housing our client were sympathetic, and we had no reason to believe that anyone was working on behalf of the CIA, and indeed they probably weren't for many years. The problem started in the beginning of January 17.
When did you first visit with him? What year was your first visit?
My first visit, I believe, was in mid 2016.
Uh-huh. And then how many times did you
And
go
I
visit
visited him
him?
once or twice a year thereafter.
Okay.
Once or twice a year since then.
And then do you still see him now in Belmarsh?
Yes, I saw him in May of 2023.
Oh, so fairly recent, less than a year ago. How is he
Yes.
doing? How's he doing there?
Oh, it's just horrific. He's being kept under horrific conditions. It's a maximum security prison. He's allowed out of his cell for 1 hour a day. He's extraordinarily depressed and gaunt looking, and it's just a horrific situation for a journalist and a publisher to be kept under the same roof as terrorists and treated as if he's some kind of terrorist is just a horrific situation.
Why are we not getting any images of what he looks like now? I mean, we hear this, but we're not. Why won't they release photographs, or have they? And I just haven't seen them, or you're not allowed to take pictures of him when you're there?
You're not allowed to even bring a cell phone or photo camera into the prison. So those have to be checked at the door. So with the security at the front. So there probably don't exist any photographs of him since
Doesn't
he's
that
been
just seem?
incarcerated.
Doesn't that just seem like, especially since this is a London prison, this is a UK prison, which is supposed to be part of the Western, democratic world, and doesn't that just seem? I mean, to have a country say, well, you're not allowed to take photographs of the prisoners, so that we can't see what they look like and what their treatment is and what kind of conditions they're living in, and none of the public is getting to see any of this. I mean, that is just so suspicious, right there. I mean, that should make all of us say that shouldn't be allowed. They should be forced to release photographs of these people so that we know what's happening inside of these prisons. It just seems
That's
absurd.
probably true. I mean, it is, to be fair, it's standard security protocol not to let cameras into visiting rooms and such. But I I doubt if a request were made for a journalist to be allowed in, a photojournalist. I'd be really surprised if
Yeah.
they let photographs be taken, but I don't know of any such requests. So I wouldn't want to say that it's been refused. I don't know if it's actually been requested.
Yeah. I would imagine that it's been requested, but they're just refusing. I would love to see their reasoning for why we can't have photographs of prisoners to see what's happening inside of these Western democratic prisons, right? In the system.
But this is what this is all about, is lack of transparency. I mean, they
Right.
don't want us to see how our fellow citizens and journalists are being held, and any prison is a despicable situation. I mean, I used to practice criminal defense, and I stopped because it was just so depressing and horrible going into jail and leaving people in there, no matter what they're alleged to have. What sort of offenses they're alleged to have committed or even did commit. And, I joke, not really funny, but I joke that my career's come full circle because now they've started locking up journalists now that I'm a media lawyer. So I'm back in jail again.
Right. Okay. So for this lawsuit that is against the CIA and Mike Pompeo, how many instances of is this like a one instance where you went in, they confiscated your phones, and you're saying they spied on you this one time, or was it repeated times that you're able to put into this lawsuit?
So it's a bit of a complicated answer. There was when Julian was first put into or first given sanctuary in the Ecuadorian embassy, these protocols were already in effect. Whereas visitors, you would check at the door your passport and your cell phone, if they had cell phones then. But and it was ostensibly for his protection, and probably was. And so the actual protocols had been going on for some time. What happened was that in around January of 2017, the CIA basically recruited the private Spanish security company that had been providing security at the embassy, and this was unbeknownst to anyone. And so it was from our lawsuit covers the period from January 2017, when David Morales from UC Global, the Spanish security company, was recruited, through March of 2018, when that company was replaced with another company under a different protocol. And so it's anyone that American citizens who visited Julian at the embassy within that time span. So honestly, I can't quite remember whether it was once or twice for me. Probably once within that specific time
Which is
span.
bad enough. How violating. I mean, did you expect to, well, how did you even find out? So how did you find out that the CIA was that had recruited the security company and they were spying on you?
Well, it was so horrifying on so many levels. Because first of all, we had assumed that the security guards at the Ecuadorian embassy were Ecuadorian government employees. I mean, we just made that assumption. They were wearing uniforms. I mean, maybe that was stupid, but they were speaking Spanish. We had always made that assumption, and they were very friendly and very nice. And we hadn't noticed any particular change in personnel. So it was a complete surprise. The way that we first learned of this was from El País, the Spanish newspaper. What happened was, after Julian was taken to Belmarsh, it became clear that there were violations of his rights while in the embassy, and basically using UC Global as the tool for that. Julian commenced a criminal investigation in Spain. And it's a bit different because there's such a thing as a private criminal prosecution in Spain. So a private citizen can initiate a prosecution. And in the course of that prosecution, which is presided over by a judge in Spain, a special court that presides over these criminal prosecutions, the police, Spanish police, had raided the offices of UC Global in connection with the crimes alleged against UC Global, and all of that material was then the court had access to it. Julian's lawyers in Spain had access to it, and this El País eventually found out about this material existing. Technically, it's under seal, most of it, but it basically leaked, and they did this expose in about October of 2019, I believe, and that was the first time that it came to our attention that UC Global that the guards were not Ecuadorian employees, that they had actually been downloading information from our phones and other devices if we'd left them, and it was violating doesn't even begin to explain it, because as sort of journalists and lawyers, and there were doctors too, we are charged with holding confidential information, and it's
Right.
we expect to be respected. So it was horrifying.
I mean, this is just so shocking. It's shocking that the Ecuadorians decided to contract out with this other company. And I mean, it's just so that alone is just so bizarre, right? That they would go and contract, I suppose, rather than having their own government workers taking care of their embassy's security. But I just wonder if the Ecuadorians, I mean, do you know if they went after this company at all? I mean, it seems like it would be a crime if they're technically on Ecuadorian soil doing this. It seems like that would have been a crime in Ecuador. And they would have said, well, now we're going to arrest these guards that were spying on all these people and this company. And we're gonna prosecute the individuals who are responsible for this crime. That's what it would seem to me. But do you know if Ecuador did anything, or was Ecuador in on it? Were they like, oh, okay, we're gonna allow the spying now to happen, so we're gonna contract with this other company in order to have a loophole to allow spying?
Right. Well, what actually happened is there was a change in government in Ecuador, I think in 2016. So the Ecuadorian president, I think it was Correa, who had granted sanctuary to Julian in 2012, was no longer in power.
Uh,
And the president who took over, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but the president who took over was essentially a puppet for the US government and would do whatever the US government wanted them to do. So we don't have any particular evidence that I know of that of the extent of the collusion, but clearly they must have, I imagine they must have known it was going on or been, tolerated it. It was more the Spanish government that was upset or in a position to prosecute because the jurisdiction of the company that was actually committing the crimes was located in Spain.
yeah, and have they done anything? Do you know anything about what the Spanish have done about that company?
Well, the criminal prosecution is ongoing.
Okay.
The judge has been very, very unhappy with the lack of cooperation from the CIA. They have sought to the equivalent of depose or interview Mike Pompeo. He's ignored that request. This is coming from a high court judge in Spain to the U.S. government and to a U.S. government agency. The U.S. has basically stonewalled this investigation.
Yeah.
They haven't even denied that their agency was part of it. They've just ignored every request from the Spanish court to help them in this investigation.
Wow. Okay, so you guys realize that you've been spied on. Do you know of exactly what was taken from your phone? Is that part of the lawsuit? Like, exactly the data or the information, or you have a record of it, or do you just know that this company was spying during that time that you visited?
What we know is that there were some leaks to El País of some of the material that's in the possession of the Spanish court now, and I certainly know that I haven't seen as part of that evidence my own personal file. But there were, for example, one of the most egregious was a woman, Stefania Morizzi, who's an Italian journalist who's follows this case a lot and is a good friend of Julian's and very supportive of WikiLeaks. And there's photographs that you can find online, or I can send them to you, but they're broad swaths of information that was grabbed from her. I mean, there's Yoko Ono's passport. There's notes that Pamela Anderson had written, and even her cell phone number or the password to her cell phone. So we've seen the extent of their, of what they've done to other people similarly situated. We know that we all went in and gave up our devices, and so we have good faith basis for assuming,
Right.
or there's no reason to think they wouldn't have done the same to us. It's up to them to prove they didn't at this point.
So how many plaintiffs are involved in this case right now?
Formal plaintiffs, there's only 4. We have
Okay.
2 lawyers and 2 journalists. Part of the issue is the small window that we're dealing with, because we wanted to keep this case very focused on the time during which the CIA we had evidence that they had basically recruited the head of UC Global, and UC Global was acting as an agent of the CIA, and therefore it's US government action, and therefore as Americans, our constitutional rights were violated.
Right.
And Julian had people visiting him from all over the world, but other people can't rely on their constitutional rights being violated. It's only Americans.
Right. So is that because the CIA is allowed to spy on any foreigners, but they're not allowed to spy on Americans? So it's very specific to Americans who went in and got spied on.
To be a little more precise about it, just because
Yeah.
I am a lawyer, it's that the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures applies with in America and 2 American citizens abroad.
Okay, got it. All right. But this wasn't technically in America. So that's why it wasn't even in it. It was not America or London. Technically, it wasn't in the UK either. This was in Ecuador, technically.
Yes, but as US citizens, we have the right not to be unreasonably searched by the US government anywhere in the world.
Right. But that protection does not apply to any of the other non-citizens who went and had the same thing happen to them. They're allowed to be spied on.
It's not as strong a case.
Right. Okay.
Our
Okay.
case is rock solid.
Yeah.
It's not as strong a case for other
Sure.
people. They may well have a claim, but it's not nearly as strong a case.
So why isn't somebody like Pam Anderson also included in the case?
I think we reached out to her and she decided not to participate. I mean, she's
Okay.
repeatedly said that she supports Julian and would do anything for him, but she didn't elect to get involved in this particular action.
I wonder if it would even weaken the case slightly. I don't know if it would, but just if they were to say, well, she's a public person, and so all of this stuff that, you can't prove that the CIA got all this information, that's some public person. I don't know if maybe that would have been like some ridiculous argument, some sort of defense. But so when did you launch? So you filed this lawsuit here, it says, in August of 2022. So it took a while. Why did it take so long from the time that you found out? Because you said that you found out in 2019 about the spying. So what's the process that makes it to where this takes so long to start to go after the government?
Well, we had a lot of research to do to identify the potential plaintiffs and reach out to potential plaintiffs. But also there was an active extradition case going on in London, and we didn't want to do anything that might adversely impact that
Got it.
that case. So it was it was a choice to some extent that we didn't want to irritate the government, or I mean, we were always hopeful that the DOJ, and still are hopeful that the DOJ, Department of Justice, would just drop the charges or withdraw the extradition application. And once that door was sort of closed, it was decided that there was nothing we could really do to put him in a worse situation. So
Right.
so we went ahead and did it.
Okay. So you file this. It's against the CIA. It's against Mike Pompeo, Undercover Global, and David Morales, right? Or who you filed this against? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes,
you
there were 4
recently,
defendants.
so they tried to get the case thrown out. What was the grounds that they were arguing for this case to be dismissed?
Well, they argued that we didn't have standing, which the judge rejected instantly. They argued that we didn't have an expectation of privacy in the Ecuadorian embassy because it was a quasi-public place. Those were the main arguments. They argued that that it was because Julian was a person of interest and there were national security concerns about him. They had the right to dig into everybody else. And basically the judge rejected the real crux of our argument was, basically we were just visitors. There was no indication that we had any information that would be helpful or that we were in any way the targets of any investigation. And it was completely unlawful if we could show that the CIA did in fact control, direct and control UC Global, and they received the information from UC Global under their instructions, that was an undue invasion of our privacy, that we absolutely had a claim.
Yeah. So the judge, but did he throw out it? I seems to see that he actually did dismiss portions of the lawsuits. What portion did he dismiss?
He dismissed the claim that There was a large part of our claim was that there was secret microphones in the conference room where we met with Julian, and those conversations were between doctors who were examining him for psychiatric issues. They were, between lawyers, they were journalists, and our allegation was, and we still contend that we had a reasonable expectation of privacy within that context. There's attorney-client privilege, there's doctor-patient privilege. The judge determined that we did not, in that context, have a reasonable expectation of privacy. There may still be a claim by Julian, should he ever be brought in front of U.S. courts, that was a breach of his attorney-client privilege. But we don't really have standing to make that claim. It's for a criminal defendant to raise that, not for the attorney. The privilege is for the client's protection, not for the lawyer.
So with this lawsuit, you've lobbied against these four different named entities: CIA, Mike Pompeo, Undercover Global, David Morales. Do they all have their own individual attorneys, or are they being represented by one attorney or one group?
The U.S. government's representing both UC Global and Mike Pompeo, and actually that's another part that was dismissed. It's very difficult to sue a government official in their individual capacity. We had sued Mike Pompeo under on the basis of all his statements that he made, showing that he was going, beyond the scope of his role as CIA director. He had a personal vendetta against WikiLeaks and Julian, and unfortunately the law on that, it all turns on a Supreme Court case of Bivens, and that law has been seriously eroded by our more conservative Supreme Court that we have now. And there was a relatively recent decision, I think in January of last year, that pretty much made our claim very weak. So Mike Pompeo has actually been dismissed from the lawsuit. So CIA is still, we're allowed to proceed against the CIA, but not against Michael Pompeo in his individual capacity. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't depose Michael Pompeo in his capacity as CIA director. But it means that he's not individually a defendant anymore.
Okay.
UC Global has defaulted. They haven't ever filed any proper response. So the case against them has just been, there's a judgment against them, or will be once the case is over.
Okay. So what are you asking for? Is this, injunctive relief? But at this point, what good is that? What are you suing for?
Well, the relief that we're claiming is that we want all the records that were seized from us destroyed. We don't want them floating around in the government's servers. But honestly, the real point of bringing this lawsuit is to bring attention to the fact that this government has been acting down and dirty and will do anything to get Julian, including violating the most basic rights that a democratic country is supposed to espouse.
Yeah. And now let's get to that. There was an assassination attempt. So the worst thing you could do to a person is to assassinate them, to just kill them and rob them of their right to life. And the U.S. government plotted to kill Julian Assange. Can you kind of walk us through? And was that Mike Pompeo? Was it? And why does he hate? Why does he have such venom against Assange? Where's that rooted from?
Well, I think he's been embarrassed. The U.S. government's been embarrassed by a lot of the WikiLeaks exposures. And basically what Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have done has basically exposed U.S. war crimes and crimes by the CIA. Illegal renditions, the outrages at Guantanamo, Pompeo presided over the CIA that was carrying out these horrific acts. Let me give you the timeline, because it's actually, if it wasn't so sick, it would be hilarious. Essentially, what happened was on December 21st of 2017, I believe, Julian was meeting with his attorneys in the embassy. And because of there were still friendly people within the Ecuadorian government, even though the president was being difficult at that time. The Ecuadorian government assisted or tried to assist Julian by issuing, first of all, they gave him citizenship of Ecuador, and then they granted him or tried to grant him diplomatic status. And the idea being that that would enable Julian to leave the embassy and go to a more friendly jurisdiction without being at risk of arrest, because the UK government would have had to respect the diplomatic status. Now, this is December 21st of 2017. Within hours of that meeting, we later learned, a international arrest warrant was issued. So the CIA obviously heard that conversation in real time. And the following day, the US ambassador to Ecuador met with the Ecuadorian foreign minister and told him that America knew about the plot, that the UK government had been told not to respect diplomatic status, and essentially it foiled the plot, which was supposed to have taken the the ability of Julian to leave. It was supposed to be Christmas Day on 2017. But what's interesting about the Pompeo link to the whole thing, and really just sick, is that in his memoir, which was published in January of 2023, he specifically says that, and this is on page 227, if anyone wants to check it out, but he specifically says that on December 23rd, 2017, he was perusing the CIA guidelines on extrajudicial killings, which is just mind-blowing. So we have a situation where Julian's, trying to get help to get out of the embassy by both a friendly people in the Ecuadorian government and his attorneys, who were helping to help him do that legally. And the US government was not only stopping that from happening and by leaning on its allies, but contemplating, and this is Mike Pompeo contemplating how to assassinate him. And then this was actually verified in the amazing reporting by Zach Dorfman and Michael Isikoff in Yahoo News in late 2021 that verified that there was a CIA plot to kidnap or kill Julian, and there were 30 government operatives that were interviewed anonymously, most of them, in the course of that reporting. So it's very strong. It's very strong evidence that there's been a real personal vendetta,
right,
by Mike Pompeo.
Is there any sort of legal consequence for that behavior, for attempting to or plotting to kill somebody? I mean, is there, it just seems like, how could they just get away with this? I mean, we know they tried to do it. Is there anything that could be done?
Well, if we had a government who cared, it could be. I mean, the real problem in this case, I mean, first of all, there should be a congressional committee. All of this has been reported to Adam Schiff as head of the Intelligence Committee, and there's been no action that I've heard of. It's the problem that we really have. I mean, we have the problem we really have is that the CIA's character assassination of Julian, which goes back to 2011, right after the Chelsea Manning exposures, which is really what this case is all about and what he's in jail for. They've so succeeded in destroying his reputation that nobody cares, and the mainstream media isn't clamoring over this. They're doing everything they can to distance themselves from him, even though this is so dangerous. This will be such a dangerous precedent. It already is. It's having a chilling effect on national security journalists who don't want to end up sitting in jail. So I'm sure they don't expose the kind of war crimes that they may be uncovering.
I mean, it just seems like Mike Pompeo should be in jail. I mean, I don't know what I mean. He really should be sitting in jail, and it's outrageous that. And what's also really outrageous is that Australia doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. Why aren't they saying, "Hey, why'd you try to kill one of our citizens?" Don't they care about their citizens? Do they, or are they kowtowing to the U.S. government more than they care about one of their own? I mean, this is so bizarre.
There's a lot of support for Julian in Australia, and because of that, the Australian government has made some gestures towards trying to get the US to consider dropping the charges or dropping the extradition. But It hasn't happened. So there's a lot of speculation about whether they I mean, honestly, almost every country in the world kowtows to the US government, and uh Australia is incredibly dependent on the US to help with its own defenses, and that's much more important than anything else. So we really have a lack of political will here. It's not that there isn't any recourse, it's that there isn't anyone who cares to pull the trigger on it.
Yeah, and I think of the American media. I mean, one of the problems is that they've, there's a lot of suspicion that the American media is also infiltrated already by security state, CIA, and already kind of embedded into the media. There's a lot of evidence of that. And so the media is remaining silent on this. And actually now what we're seeing is the media helping the government. I mean, we just watched the New York Times help with exposing Teixeira, right, who leaked documents, and they went and did the investigation. It's like they did the job for the FBI or the CIA. So they're not only not saying anything and in bed potentially with the security state, but then they're also now acting on behalf of them at this point in with where we're at with all of this. I mean, it's just, so what do they claim? So where are we at now with Julian Assange? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it goes back to the weapons of mass destruction. I mean, it isn't even the supposed liberal media backing up the Democratic government. I mean, they've been in bed for the longest time, the traditional corporate media with the security services.
Yeah.
And some of it may be, it's because the national security journalists don't want to irritate their sources. I mean, there could be a number, but I suspect it has a lot more to do with corporate media interests being aligned with
right
corporate interests elsewhere.
Right. Okay, so where are we at with Julian's extradition? So this is his last, is this the last attempt to halt the extradition? Is he in his last?
So it's, unfortunately, there's not a simple answer to any of this. Basically what happened was Julian's extradition hearing that was in 2020, was initially granted just on the basis of that he was a suicide risk, and all of the political defenses to extradition were disregarded by the magistrate judge, the district judge at that point, and then that decision was overturned on the first appeal, and the overturning of that decision was ratified by the Home Office, who then basically ordered Julian's extradition. So what the UK lawyers are doing now is appealing they have a right to appeal the district judge's decision on all the points that she had rejected, because those haven't been entertained yet in the previous appeal that had been brought, which was the basis for the extradition decision that had happened. So this could be a really, really interesting hearing if they let it happen. The appeal is basically primarily, the crux of it is the fact that the UK Extradition Act, like many others in other countries, basically it prohibits extradition if it can be shown that the purpose of the extradition is to punish someone on account of their political beliefs or opinions. And in this case, it's so clear that Julian Assange's political mission is to expose war crimes, particularly of the US and UK governments, and although by no means exclusively, and that this is a vendetta. So what happened was in June of this year, you need to have permission to appeal to the High Court, and Julian's lawyers had submitted a 150-page, incredibly well-argued appeal, and showing all the basis for the appeal and all the basis on which the lower court had made a bad decision. A single judge rejected that application and just not on its merits, but just said this isn't worth hearing. Which is absurd, because there's an obligation to hear a appeal where matters of public interest are at play. That's one of the bases for appeal under UK law. So the Julian's lawyers then appealed that refusal to permit the substantive appeal. And that's actually what's happening February 20th and 21st of this year, 2024. There's going to be a hearing, which is really just argument by there's no evidence going to be presented. It's argument by the lawyers for the government and the lawyers for Julian Assange to argue why the appeal should or should not be heard in the first place. So if that is granted, then the full on the appeal, if that permission to appeal is granted, then and that's going to be heard by two high court judges, then there'll be a full hearing on the appeal, on the substantive points in the appeal down the line. So the concern is that there's just every effort to prevent Julian from being able to air in an open court all of the atrocities that have been perpetrated against him in the course of this proceeding.
Okay, so at this point, he is set to be extradited. And so this is an appeal. What they're trying to do is appeal the extradition, right?
Exactly. At this point, they're getting permission, trying to get a permission to appeal. So if they lose that, he could be extradited immediately. And there is some hope that there could be an appeal to the European court, but especially since Brexit, but honestly, even before then, the British government didn't pay much mind to what the European court said or did. So I don't know that would stay or, prevent even temporarily the execution, even if they execution.
Well,
I hope not. The extradition, even if they take up the case, but that's an avenue that will certainly be pursued. But it's very dire. If this doesn't get heard, he'll be here, within months, I would imagine.
Right. Okay. So, and then if he does, if the request to appeal is granted, then do we have any idea of how long it takes for that appeal process, for the actual hearing, for the appeal itself?
No, a date would probably be set, but it could be 6 months hence. It could be quick if they want to do it quickly. It's all in their discretion.
Okay. But we're getting down to the wire here, ultimately. I mean, and if they say, okay, we're not going to extradite him, then what happens? So let's say the hearing's granted, 6 months from now, they do the appeal for the extradition, he wins, and he's not going to be extradited to the United States. Is he a free man at that point?
Yes. He'd be unwise to stay in the UK because the UK has already demonstrated that it's friendly to the US government, and the US government will probably try to get him on something else. But he would be a free man for at least that moment, and he could then go to somewhere that would be a little safer for him, probably back to Australia.
Well, unless the Australians are going to extradite him to the United States. I mean, would they do that, do you think?
I don't think they would do that because, it's one thing not being able to get them to drop it. It's another thing. And Julian has a lot of support there. I think that would be very difficult for them to do internally, politically. But there's other European countries that are friendlier too. So
yeah, so he'd have to beam out of the UK almost immediately if he was granted that, or they said we're not going to extradite him. Otherwise, the chances of that though seem slim with the way that this case has gone, with how long it's taken. And it seems like the UK doesn't want to upset the United States. And the United States clearly, look, if the US is going to plot to kill the guy because they think he's that dangerous or they're that angry with him, I have a hard time believing that the UK is going to prevent his extradition.
It's tricky because I don't think that the US government really wants a hearing here. I think people would if there was a trial on this, I would hope that the mainstream media would get a lot more engaged.
Okay.
So I sort of, the sort of received wisdom is they just want him to rot in jail. And it's really anyone's guess. I imagine all of these decisions are made behind closed doors. I don't think anything actually happens based on what's said or isn't said in the courtroom.
Right. But you bring up a good point. It would be very bad optics for the United States to bring him here and then put this guy on trial, this journalist or this publisher on trial. It would be very and I do think that at that point, there would be an outpouring of support from the media. Maybe not the security state apparatus within the media, but the rest of the journalists, I think, would say, wait a minute, what is going on here? This is a huge violation of our ability to publish documents that were given. And so there would be, I think, it would be publicly for the United States very embarrassing and very, very tricky. So I think you make a really good point that they probably don't really want him here, which is why this has gone through now 3 presidents, right? So you had Obama that refused to do really anything about it and let him just hide in the Ecuadorian embassy. And then you had Trump that actually said, no, we're going to go for it because he had Mike Pompeo, who had the clear vendetta. But then Biden, Biden could have just said, all right, never mind, but he's not saying never mind. So...
Well, we have 2 wars going on right now that we're actively supporting. So it's difficult to, even for Biden in this environment, to release someone who's so critical of and exposes U.S. war crimes, and also the arms dealing lobby and the gun. There's just a lot of political pressure. I imagine. To not look weak on this particular issue, which is how it might be perceived. Principles don't seem to, Obama, to his credit, he didn't like Julian either. Nobody in any government around the world
right.
is a fan of Julian Assange. But because he's all for transparency and disclose and lets people know what they're up to. But he Obama, as a sort of intelligent lawyer, realized that this would be an appalling precedent, and they couldn't go that way. Clinton hated Julian. She asked if he could be droned when she was Secretary of State. Biden was buddies with both of them, so I don't think Biden actually is a fan of Julian's. We haven't seen a lot of mainstream Democrats showing any interest in this case.
Right.
It's an abomination. We supposedly care about the First Amendment, and we are letting it get. We talk about Trump being the one who's destroying our Constitution and destroying our liberties and our democracy. And to me, the Fourth Estate is the most important. The government accountability that the press brings to account is the most important protection we have against a corrupt government, and the Democrats are just as bad.
So going down this line of logic, which I think you bring up a really great point, that the U.S. really doesn't want this here on this. They're really like, okay, we don't want this case here. We don't want to deal with this here. We just want this to kind of go away. Right now, Julian Assange doesn't get that much media attention. If he shows up here, suddenly he's going to get a lot. And what he exposed is going to be brought back up and dragged back out, and everyone's going to know more about it. And you've got the younger generation that they're now older and they're going to be reading about it more. And already, when people are already very mistrustful of the government as it is, like at an all-time high of mistrust, and this would just really. So I think you make a good argument they don't really want him here. So that being said, the UK can't really, or can they, just continue to drag out the extradition and keep him in jail rotting? Or is there like a limit of how long they can actually legally do this? Do we know?
There's absolutely no limit. They can hold him forever pending extradition. So, and he doesn't want to come here, obviously. So, we're going to keep trying to exhaust every appeal opportunity we get, and then they drag their feet between each procedural. This last one that happened in June was such a surprise and so ridiculous that they wouldn't give him permission to appeal, that we're spending this whole year just talking about whether he can appeal. It's such an important case. It's just an absurd proposition. I can't imagine he's going to lose the right to appeal at the next hearing if we get to that point. But everything is being done. I think the UK just follows orders, honestly. I think they just do whatever the US wants them to do. So if this is why, our efforts are to make people in America, United States citizens, a bit more outraged about what's going on, a little more aware. People don't even know he's in jail. Journalists aware that he didn't commit any crime, that if it's called a crime, they'd all be in jail too.
Right.
If we could get people to be more aware here, and pressure was actually on the Department of Justice here, to drop the charges or drop the extradition application. That's really the pressure point that has to be pushed now.
Could he just remain on these current extradition orders? The UK just says we're not going to allow any appeals, and he just then is held, and the US never requests them. Or does the UK have a limit on, look, you have an extradition order, so we're putting you on a plane. Could they hold him for 30 years theoretically? Because the US has never said, okay, now's the time.
Not to my knowledge. I mean, that's not an area of my expertise, but it's certainly
Yeah.
from once the application from the US is ostensibly we want to bring him to the US to be tried. Once that application is granted, there's really not much basis, I believe, for the UK to keep him.
Okay.
I don't know on what basis they'd keep him. And certainly last time, I mean, what the decision then goes to the Home Secretary, which is the equivalent of our Secretary of State. And certainly last time it happened pretty quick that extradition order was issued. In fact, there might even be a period of time, like 30 or 60 days, for the decision to be made by the Home Office after an extradition order is entered.
That's why it just seems to me like they can't drag this out really forever. As much as they would like to just keep him in jail forever, it just seems like there would have to be some movement on this.
They kind of have dragged it on forever. I mean, 5 years is an absurd period of time, and then we've got at least another year or two, assuming he's allowed to appeal. And then if they do, even though they probably don't have to, they may decide to let him stay in the UK pending the appeal to the European Courts of Human Rights. So if that's their goal, which many think is to just let him rot in jail and hope everybody forgets about him, and he's getting sicker and sicker, that they can certainly keep that going for a very long time.
Wow. They might want to do that, because there was an article that recently just came out in The Nation. It was Charles Glass, who went to go visit him in Belmarsh prison just last month. And he said that the one thing Julian Assange, what he said he was afraid of, one of his fears about his own imprisonment, was that the U.S. government surveillance and restrictions on the group's funding for WikiLeaks have scared off potential whistleblowers. So it sounds, when he says, if he's going to say something like that, like, I think this is causing the chilling effect and it's scaring whistleblowers from coming forward. Sounds to me like if he gets out, he's not going to stop. And they probably see that and they think, oh my gosh, he's going to come out and he wants to continue getting with whistleblowers and continuing to publish their documents.
Absolutely. That's his whole reason for existence, basically. Charles Glass is actually one of our co-plaintiffs. He's an American journalist who visited during that particular time period. So he's
he's listed as well. Wow. Yeah. So, and it sounds like, Julian this is a great article to read, kind of just to get the latest update on what he looks like and how he's doing and what he's eating. I mean, junk food, it sounds like, is what they're feeding him, and not really letting him have a radio or books, or, they've now kind of they have to allow certain things, because as Charles Glass says in here, is how could you allow a Hezbollah terrorist to have a radio, but you won't let Julian Assange have a radio? Like, do you really want people to find out about that? So it's just unbelievable. Really hopeful, though, for Julian. A lot of me, I mean, I get it. He doesn't want to come to the U.S. He doesn't want the extradition, but part of me would think, gosh, I mean, you'd want sort of this to end. I mean, you'd want to have some sort of, with Belmarsh, it just seems like maybe I'm wrong, but is it better at Belmarsh than it would be if he were held in a U.S. prison? If he came here and ended up going on trial and was convicted, is it better there?
No question. I mean, it's awful there, but compared to a U.S. prison, I mean, the U.S. is a maximum security prison where he could go to Guantanamo or the equivalent, right? They don't treat people that are treated as international hostile enemies very well in prison here. I don't think he really has any belief that he would ever get out of a U.S. prison, because the case would be so stacked against him. I mean, the jurisdiction for the case is the Eastern District of Virginia, which is where the jury's going to be packed with CIA family members, and
right.
He's not going to get a fair trial here. There's no way.
Well, let's hope that
people don't, especially if people don't care. I mean, if you had people rallying around, then it might make a difference. But nobody here cares. I hope they would care a lot more if he comes, and I hope that through you having us on your show and, people starting to pay more attention and give us a bit more of a platform. Hopefully people will start thinking about it and being more aware about how dire this really is and how important this really is.
Yeah.
Because political pressure is the only way this is going to end. It's not going to be through the courts.
Right, absolutely. Deborah, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Is there anywhere you want to direct people for how they could continue following what's going on with the lawsuit that you're involved in with the CIA? Good luck with that. I hope you win. I really, I think for all of us, I hope that you win that case. We don't want the CIA spying on us Americans without due process, without a warrant, right? So we really hope that you win this.
Thank you. And we're excited about the next stage, which is discovery. So we'll be able to depose Michael Pompeo and ask for a ton of stuff. So it'll be fun. But the AssangeDefense.org is the AssangeDefense.org is where the latest information on his case can be found. And usually they post something about our case too. But that's where, if you want to help in any way, that's the organizing platform in the US.
And when do you go into discovery and all of this? When does all that start?
There's meetings about it in mid-January, and then a schedule will be set at that point. So it's fairly soon. It should be very soon.
Can't wait for all the information that's going to come out during that discovery process. Hopefully we'll get updates on it.
So they can't ignore, they can ignore a High Court Supreme judge in Spain, but they can't ignore a Southern District New York judge.
Yeah.
We're going to be in good shape.
All right, Deborah, thank you so much. Deborah Herbeck, thank you so much for being here, and really appreciate your time and best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, guys. Well, that is it for tonight's show. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you watching the case against Julian Assange. It really does affect all of us who are exposing any sort of information or truth, whether you call yourself a journalist or a publisher or just an independent talker or reporter or whatever, or even if you just enjoy independent content, if you enjoy knowing the truth, if you enjoy finding out, or I don't know if it's necessarily if enjoy is the right word, but finding out what our government is really up to, exposing the government crimes, exposing war crimes and surveillance, and all of that is so important. And the case against Julian Assange really truly threatens all of that. It could really put all of us at risk anytime anything is exposed and cause a massive chilling effect to where people do not speak out against their governments. And I cannot think of a less democratic or less free society than to not have the ability to speak up against our government, to not have the ability to expose their crimes. So we really hope for Julian Assange. In my mind, he's a hero, what he did, exposing. I don't care about any other dirt that they might dig up on Julian, about his personal life or any smears that they try to lob against him. At the end of the day, he exposed the truth about our government, the truth about military and war. And for that, he absolutely is a hero for many people, exposing all of that. So again, guys, thank you so much for watching. We will be back again tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Until then, have a great night. Bye-bye.